Hey guys, today we are going to be recreating this menu introduction that I had in my previous video, which is the ultimate keyframe easing guide. Pretty cool, right? Well, I'm going to attempt to recreate this in DaVinci Resolve. Notice how I said in DaVinci Resolve. Yeah, I used After Effects to create this originally. But this viewer requested that I make a tutorial on how to do it in DaVinci Resolve Fusion. And that's where this video comes in. Also, just so you know that I can do it, here's the recreation that I've already created and what I'm going to be showing you how to make today. I think that's pretty cool. Let's get started. Alright, so go ahead and make a Fusion composition. Mine is 6 seconds long, but you can make yours however long you want it to be. And then go to the beginning of it and click on it. Then head into the Fusion page. First, we're going to start with media. Grab an image that you want to use as a background and then drag it in. Then connect it to the media out. Now you have your image. Next, we need to add Gaussian blur. You can add it just like that. And now let's adjust the settings. First, let's turn down the strength to 0. Now let's add a keyframe. Then go to frame 60 and then add another keyframe by entering the value you'd like. I'm going to do 0.591 because that's what I used originally. Now make sure your spline editor is open by clicking on the spline button right here and then click the full screen button. Now that you've done that, you can adjust the keyframes on your screen to how you like it and then highlight them both. Or press Command A on your keyboard. Then press S so that they're eased. I actually used a default eased curve, so it should be a value of 33. Yep, 33 on the ease in and ease out. And it looks something like this. It's obviously a bit laggy, but if you go into the edit page, then you can see. Oh, that's also laggy. Let's just wait for it to render. Alright, it looks something like this. Pretty smooth, right? Now let's create the text we see at the beginning where it says DaVint, which is my channel name. So go ahead and add all these nodes. So that would be text, drop shadow, soft glow, waviness, and transform. Or if you were just to add them normally, you could just type in text, then connect it like this. Then after add a drop shadow, then a soft glow, then a waviness, then a transform. I'm actually going to use the one that I just manually did so that I can explain all the keyframing to you. So let's start with the text. Change it to what you would like. So I'm just going to do, yet again, my channel name. I'm actually just going to remove all this stuff. It's just clutter for now. Don't worry about it contrasting to the background just yet, since we're going to be doing some things later in order to make it contrast. So add the drop shadow into your node tree, and you can already see it makes the text pop out. Adjust these settings to your liking. Alright, that's my preference. These are my settings. Alright, now soft glow. Drag it in, and as you can see, it affects the color of your text. So, turn down the gain and increase the glow size. Actually, just change the settings to what you'd like. I think this looks pretty good. Now you can go back to the original text node and change the color to your liking. I think this is a bit too bright, so I'm going to make it a bit darker. There we go. Alright, next, we're going to add the waviness effect. Alright, it already looks wrong, but that's just because the waviness is vertical, not horizontal. So, change it from vertical to horizontal. Now, you can change the scale, which is basically just the detail of the waves. So you can make the waves really detailed, meaning that there are a lot of waves in one word, or not very detailed, which means that there's one or even less than one wave per word. So I'm going to leave it at around 12.6. Now, for the strength, it's just how much the waviness affects your text. I don't want it to affect it too much, but I want it to be visible. So I'm going to do something like 13.4. You can change the phase depending on where you want the text to start, and then change the speed. I think I'll turn it down to be pretty slow. Now let's add the transform effect. Alright, let's start keyframing. So, go to where you want your text animation to start, in my case at 60 once the Gaussian blur fully takes effect, and then create a center keyframe. Within 20 frames time, I'm going to make my text go from 0.4 to 0.5 on the y-axis. So, type in 0.4, and then go 20 frames forward, or however many you want to, and then type 0.5. That looks pretty good already, but it lacks smoothness. So highlight these keyframes, and then ease them. Now we can create a graph. In my ultimate keyframe easing guide tutorial, which actually has this menu screen intro, you can see a little bit more about keyframes, but I'll be doing a basic explanation. So bring this up and this up until the curve looks pretty similar to this. Now we need to animate opacity. Go to the text node and then go to shading. Then keyframe opacity and turn it down to 0. Now go to the last keyframe and turn it up. You can ease the opacity keyframes if you'd like. One tip I have, since these keyframes are in the same area so you can't select them by highlighting, is to uncheck everything else that you don't need so that you only have the keyframes that you want to select remaining. Then you can ease them. Again, I'm going to use the default easing curve. It looks something like this. One thing I forgot to do is actually enable motion blur on that transform node. My personal settings are 4 and 360 here, and I don't touch these two. And now you can see, probably if you zoom in, that there's a bit of motion blur. This is with and this is without. With, without, with, without, with, without. You can see the difference, right? Anyway, I'm going to enable it and zoom back out. Now it looks like this. Next, let's make the text animate up so that there's a space for the other UI elements. So first, go ahead and let the text sit for a certain amount of time. In my case, I'm going to do 60 frames, so 1 second, and start the next animation at 140. I'm going to use the same transform node. So I'm going to keyframe it and then move a little bit ahead. Let's just do 20 frames. Now I'm going to move the position to 0.8, but you can choose where you want it to move. Now I'm going to ease the keyframe. Maybe I'll add a bit more easing out and a bunch of ease in. Or not a bunch, just a decent amount. And then you get something that looks like this. Pretty cool, right? Next, let's do the rest of the UI elements. Move this media out a bunch to the right, then add a few more text nodes. Also, add a transform after the first one. Trust me, we'll need it later. Then, customize it to your liking. I'm actually going to just delete the rest of them and then copy the text node so that I can keep the font consistent. Now we can change the text. Okay, now let's keyframe these. I'm actually going to start the opacity keyframing right when the DaVinci logo passes the watch. So let's make a keyframe here. Then move 30 frames forward and another keyframe. Now we can turn it down. Now move 5 frames forward or however many you would like, and then do the same thing for the options. Obviously the ending keyframe is also going to be 5 frames later, just to keep it consistent. And finally the exit. It should look something like this. Pretty smooth. Alright, next we need to animate in the cursor, as well as animating the watch. You'll see why we animate the watch button in a minute. First, let's animate the cursor. Let's add a background node. And now while the background node is selected, add a polygon. Now the path here doesn't really matter, so I'm just going to do something random. And then we are going to add the media, which is our cursor. Once you've done that, add a transform node to the media. And then we can right click the center and then click path. Then go to modifiers and then right click here and then connect to polygon 1 polyline. Okay, so move this to where you want your final point to be, and then this first one where you want your first point to be, and then use these handles as you like in order to create a path that you want your cursor to follow. Let's just do something like this. Next, unkeyframe this displacement, and you can already see what this does. It moves the cursor. But even at the very beginning position, it's still in view, so we just want to drag it out. There we go. Now go to the point where you want the animation to start, keyframe displacement, and then go to where you want the animation to end. I want it to end at 270. So drag the displacement right or left depending on what you did, and then you'll see that you have an animation, and it also appears here in the spline graph. I'm gonna condense all of these so I can see everything that's checked, and then uncheck everything except for transform 3. Now we can clearly see our keyframes. Select them and then ease them. What I'm gonna do is this graph, and this is what it looks like. However, motion blur is extremely important here, so let's add that. But you can't go into the settings here to add motion blur. You need to go back to tools and then settings. Now add motion blur. As you can see, the motion blur is clearly taking effect. as you look at the cursor here. And then look at your animation. As you can see, the cursor is off center, so we need to fix that. In order to fix that, after we head back into Fusion, we can add another transform after this, and then select it, and then change the cursor's position. As you can see, it's now on center. But we still need to animate the watch. I start the watch animation even before the cursor touches it because of the easing curve, and I'll explain that later. So let's just do frame 235 as a start. Then use this transform that I talked about before in order to animate it. Also make sure that the pivot is in the center of the text you're animating. Now keyframe the size. After you've done that, you can ease it. I'm going to use an easing curve that looks something like this graph right here. As you can see, the animation really starts to ramp up here. So if I drag my playhead here, you can see that the cursor is already fully on the watch. So now it fully animates. Finally, we need to animate the click. So let's go a few frames later. Let's just say 285, and then go to that cursor thing. We can use the transform 4 that we already have here, since we're only animating the size. Actually, just to keep it simple, I'm going to add yet another transform. Make sure that the pivot is on the tip of the cursor so that it looks like the cursor is going into that point. Then keyframe the size. Go to where you want the animation to be done halfway, then keyframe this and make it smaller, and then go to where you want the animation to end and then make it larger. You'll now need to ease the keyframes. I'm going to use the default curve. Looks pretty good, except I'm just going to add the motion blur. And done. Now we have our final result. It looks pretty cool, but I'm going to add a bit of a fade at the end. Now the animation is truly complete. Nope, just joking. Well, actually it depends. If you'd like, add some sound effects. That's what I did in the original intro for my ultimate keyframing guide. But you don't have to. Now, you're good to export. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.